Hello, hello. All right, going to give this a second. Welcome. I am Carrie for gluten's sake, and so excited for another interview today with Olivia of Yum Gluten Free in Australia. So I know it potentially is not an ideal time for everyone, but awesome. Okay. Hey, Jess. All right. So I'm going to invite Olivia on and get her added. And we're going to talk all things celiac, gluten free, Australia. So it is just connecting. I'm wearing headphones because there's construction outside my window and it is super, super loud. Yay! Hi!
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah! Yay! I'm so glad to have you. So,
I'm loving this series, by the way. I've been catching up and there's been some amazing stuff. Everyone needs to go back and watch the previous lives.
I
So good.
honestly I've already learned so much. I've
Yeah,
shared things that I've learned with other people I've interviewed and they've learned, and then obviously people watching have learned. Like, it's been awesome.
so good.
Yeah. So let's just start with introducing yourself. What do you want people to know about you?
Well, I am American living in Australia. Been here back and forth for 10 years, but consistently for the past 6.5. So a lot of my life has been spent in Australia now. I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2010.
Okay.
So 9 years this year, which is crazy. But I was very sick for 9 years before that, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to because average diagnosis time is, they say, between 5 and 10 years. So
Yeah.
I'm like on the upper end. And I actually was diagnosed after I was doing my university exchange here in Australia, and I ended up having to leave early. So when I was at uni, they say in Australia,
Yeah.
10 years ago, and I was supposed to be here for a year, and I ended up cutting out by a couple of months and had to drop out of all my classes because I was so sick and just physically couldn't attend, couldn't do anything. So flew home, and then it still took me a few months to get diagnosed. The only thing I feel like that did diagnose me was starting to journal. um, I knew what was wrong. I knew something was wrong, and I knew that there had to be some sort of consistency to it, but I couldn't figure it out without putting something on paper and seeing a pattern. So that
So,
finally
like
led
food
me to realize it
journaling,
was this.
or like what kind of journaling?
It was more like symptom journaling. So it was, I didn't know it was about food. So even though for me, everyone has their own symptoms and we know just how varied they can be, as with
Yep.
any autoimmune condition. That's why it's so hard to diagnose. But I had the classic like GI symptoms, but they weren't my primary concern, which you hear a lot. So mine was much more, oh my gosh, I had so many symptoms I didn't realize were symptoms at the time. But like chronic fatigue, brain fog, really bad anxiety, which just got progressively worse over time. Um, I had really bad mouth ulcers, which was an ongoing problem forever. Like my dentist in high school ended up recommending me to be on baking soda toothpaste to help neutralize the acid, which did help. And I still do that now, even though it's much better. I have really chronic sinus infection, so just like so much inflammation, and it wasn't seasonal, so we knew it wasn't like seasonal allergies related and that kind of thing. But I would get like really extreme fevers and was always sick, so low immune system. And anyway, it was always like anytime I went to the doctor, which was very regularly, they always wanted to just attribute it to growing pains, hormonal teenager,
Yep.
just seeking attention. There were a whole lot of reasons that doctors gave my family for why I was not wanting to go to school and really struggling with anxiety. And then a lot of things that you don't tell anyone about either. So a lot of my friends had no idea that I was going through any of this, just really my mom.
Yeah, especially,
So
yeah, when you're a teenager. I mean, it's like you don't want to be
mm,
different, you don't want to stand out.
no,
Yeah.
you really don't. And whenever you're feeling like this all the time, you do start believing that maybe it is the way it's supposed to be. People do feel bad. This is, people are sick all the time. And we want to believe that we're normal, I think, number one, but we're also not taught that these could all be symptoms of something else. So we're not taught much about underlying causes. So anyway, through the actual journaling, that's the first time that I was able to attribute any symptom to food. So it's eating a piece of bread and like vomiting. So I couldn't put those two and two together. It did take some more like investigative research. And the symptom that finally got me diagnosed was me telling my physician that I felt like I had cigarette burns in my stomach, was the only way I could describe it, like targeted pain. So for me, I was like, that's probably my villi was just like dead. Like there was nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so scary to me. I mean, because you later, right, once you're diagnosed, you have to learn to advocate for yourself, like, which is what I talked about with someone else on an interview, like, really learning that process, even if you're not someone who naturally does that. But it's sad to me on the pre diagnosis, like your story. It's like you had to advocate for yourself before you even knew what was going on.
And I'm the youngest of three, and I very much have been so happy to be the person who goes along with everything, because I just wanted to hang out with my sisters. I don't really care what we were doing or where we were going or anything else. So to then have to really transform like an entire personality, even pre-diagnosis, when I was sick all the time, and really speaking up for yourself and saying, I'm not going to give up because something is wrong. And then when you have something diagnosed, and then you're like, okay, great. Well, this is the rest of my life. I'm going to have to make some serious changes to the way that I approach certain scenarios, because it's my health now, and it's concrete, which does make you feel a little bit better from at least the emotional side, that you're
Yeah.
not making it up and you have something to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Diary of a celiac. I agree. I was recently diagnosed and I look back and a lot of my issues were related to gluten intolerance and it took almost 30 years. Ugh.
Yeah, that is massive.
Uh, okay, so
I know.
you got diagnosed and then you now have this amazing platform in Australia. Like how long have you been doing Yum Gluten Free? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Yum Gluten Free has been on its own journey for six years. Yum is six. I actually acquired Yum after I've
Oh.
been with Yum since the beginning, and the previous owner was selling the business because she had her own stuff going on with her family, and I was the only celiac that was doing any work with the business. And yeah, I just thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy a business. So I did. And it's been a serious journey during that time. But I've learned a lot about myself, and things that I do well and things that I don't do well, and managing your own time. And it's been really interesting, but really rewarding. I love the community side. So Yum itself, on the website, we've got heaps of information. We work with a lot of contributors who contribute recipes, and these are everyone from moms to dietitians, anyone, in this space. And then we've got digital magazine that we've recently like relaunched. And so it's quarterly, and that's been tons of fun. I just love putting it together. It's always like manic, but I love it.
Yeah.
And I love, my favorite part of running a business in this space, so Yum Gluten Free as a business, is one, I equally enjoy having celiac disease, so understanding my community and being able to say, we have so many options. There's this amazing new product. There's this and that. You can go here, and you can travel here and stay this accommodation, and they'll take care of you and all these things. I love that community side. But I also love working with these businesses that if they don't reach their market, they're not going to continue, or at least not thrive. So being able to build relationships with brands that are working so hard to provide us with products or services and being able to give them exposure as well is just like awesome.
Absolutely. I was just talking to Hannah this morning about that when I interviewed her, because I caught part of your stories talking about this. Like, she has decided she only eats at entirely gluten-free restaurants. But what I love about her is, like, she doesn't shame you for you making your own choices of how you're going to dine out, right? Like, it's her choice. She's transparent about that, but not like, oh my gosh, this is what I do, so you have to do this. So we were having a conversation around that, and like my 100% gluten-free guide, I said the same. Like, what I love about it is it's supporting all these other businesses that support us through offering gluten-free experiences that people get to dine all over the world. Like, it's amazing.
Yes, definitely. And there are a lot of people that choose to only dine out 100% gluten-free places, and I think so much of that, one, maybe because of recurring illness, but also just mentally and emotionally, it's something that you don't have to bear, to do all those questions. I know you were talking in a couple of interviews about just the emotional side of it and how you really do have to be your own advocate all the time. And it is quite burdensome, and it definitely can be. And exhausting. So thank God I have a ridiculously amazing family and husband who, when I just don't have it in me, can have all the conversations in the world. For me personally, I have built so many beautiful relationships at restaurants and cafes that wanted to serve celiacs but never knew how. So there's been like another side of the coin as well, is that by speaking up, and we don't have as many 100% gluten-free places here in Australia as there are in New York. But by having those conversations, and when I am feeling bold, which is lots of the time now, I actually just love talking about it. And then being able to teach people, like, it's possible. You can cater to people like me. There's like little changes you have to make and be consistent with your training. But yeah, like it's totally possible. Not everywhere, but in lots of places it is.
Absolutely. Hey, Margaret. Oh, Margaret says best gluten-free directory for Australia. Yay.
Oh, I love Margaret. She's the best.
So great.
She's the best gluten-free mama in Australia.
Her recipes and her feed, like, every time I'm just like, I need to learn from you. Her photography is awesome. I seriously love it.
Actually unreal. Like, I just want every single brand in Australia to send her their products and get all of their website photos done, because she's amazing.
Yes. And she's so cute. I have to say, like, what you're saying, okay, so I'm in Vietnam, right? And if Vietnam can now, and granted, this is very rare, but I was just telling someone this story. There's a taco bar that opened a couple months ago in my neighborhood, and literally was on my block of my old apartment, and I was in Malaysia, and I came back from traveling, and they opened, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And so I go in and they have gluten-free marked on the menu. And so I was having a conversation and I started to ask questions, and she just goes, do you have celiac? And I was like, I have never heard that word in Vietnam, like, ever. So there's hope, honestly. If like Vietnam can learn celiac, I really have hope for places like Australia and everywhere else.
I love that. I seriously love that. And especially my husband and I, we got married just over a year ago, and we waited way too late to book our flights back. So we ended up booking a flight with Eva Air, which was actually a great experience. But we had like an 18-hour layover in Taipei, and I was freaking out because I read all this stuff online that like essentially said, if you have celiac disease, like, don't go to Thailand. Sorry, I paused.
Oh, that's okay.
And I was like, well, great, because we're going to Taiwan for 18 hours. So anyway, and then I found.
Did you go to Plants?
Plants, yeah, yes. And it was awesome. They were so lovely, and I ate enough food for like 5 people for 4 days, and I was so happy.
Yes, Square
So
and Lily own that place, and they're awesome. I got to spend a little time when I was there. I spent like maybe 10 days in Taipei last year.
yes,
Yeah, it's fun. They're still the
love
only
it.
100% gluten-free spot in all of Taiwan.
Well, that was one of those examples where I was like, I cannot ask anyone a question because I am, one, not feeling confident. I'm so exhausted. Number two. So like, we're gonna book it and walk 1,600 miles to this one place so I can eat, and then we can do whatever else we want for the rest of the day.
Yes. But I was actually amazed. There are a lot of gluten-free options in Taipei. Like that's the only entirely gluten-free place, but there's a
Yeah.
couple other spots that do a great job.
Well, to be honest, I didn't do a whole lot of research because we had gotten married 5 days earlier. So that was just like not, wedding planning was all that
Yes.
was on
Yes. Fair
the things
enough.
list of things to do.
So, do you have any upcoming travels for this year?
Well, I really wanted to go to Bali. We don't have any plans to go to Bali, but I just keep putting that into the universe every time someone asks. So
Okay.
I'm just really hoping it's going to happen. We
I
actually have
love that.
nothing like international coming up. Yeah, if we go, I'll let you know if you have any tips.
I'm going next month, so
We
I
don't have any
will
international.
after.
Oh, are you? Oh, great. Okay, good. Good to know. I'm going to Melbourne in July. So there's a brand new like expo that's come to Australia called the Free From an Allergy Show.
Okay.
And it's well overdue in this country because so many other countries have like a free from show. So not just celiac, but
Yep, yep.
gluten free and whatever else. And then they have like a dedicated allergy section, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to be there and I'm speaking on a panel, I mean, not on a panel, on a platform there, which would be super fun. And then be doing lots of gluten free eating in Melbourne. And that's really it. Hoping to go home for Christmas, but I don't have any big trips
Yeah.
planned this year.
Yeah.
Done a lot. Last year we were in Europe for 4 weeks, so that was like our big trip.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are your go-to places to eat out by you that you love?
Well, I'm based in Brisbane, so I have so many places that I go and absolutely love. So we've got a couple of gluten free, like really awesome 100% gluten free places. So there's Nodo, which you may have seen their donuts
Yes.
on the gram. So love Noto, run by Coeliac. Another 100% gluten-free cafe is NutraHit, and they actually were just like a raw and baked like vegan treats. But now they just opened a cafe, which is exciting. I haven't been yet. We've got an amazing yakitori place that is like 99% gluten-free. They have one curry that's not 100% gluten-free, like separate from everything else. So one of the women who own it, she's gluten intolerant. She's Japanese and gluten intolerant. So everything else is GF, all their soy sauce and stuff. We've got so many places that are really good for catering. There's a place called Dovetail on Overend, and the husband of the owner, he's celiac, and they're lovely. There's a Marcia de Macaron, which is the gluten-free bakery. But there is so much in Sydney and Melbourne as well. So I put up a Sydney list recently, and actually I have the other half of that list I need to put up. I think I just put up restaurants that have cafes. Sydney has heaps and heaps of great stuff, but I think it's just harder to access because it's such a big city.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a little bit more difficult. But there's an Arepa's place. Rough and Bear is 100% gluten free. Nutty Donuts is 100% gluten free and also amazing. Provecho Cantina is 100% gluten free Mexican place. Whole Grain Bakery, and then Melbourne has heaps. There's a lot of places that are able to cater in Australia. And I feel like one of the beautiful things about living in a country that's as massive in Australia but has a smaller population, unlike the States, is that you find more common trends throughout the whole country. So people will ask me, you know, what about in the States? What's easier, like Australia or America? I'm like, well, you just can't compare, because if you're in New York City, like, you're living the bloody dream. But if you're in South Carolina, you're going to struggle.
True.
So really dependent on, and not even what state you're in, like what city you're in as well in the States. So in
Yeah.
Australia, because we've got a smaller population, I feel like everyone is better at sort of getting on board. So if one place is gonna start providing gluten-free, other cities sort of are like, yep, this is what we're doing now, and are just more accessible. And Australia is awesome with having a really big, it's changed a lot, so I've heard, but at least since I've been here, I feel like Australia is really good about wanting more like locally sourced and supporting farmers. So you have less processed foods, which obviously makes it easier to try to dine out, and there's not 600 packages they have to go through to figure out if something is. So I find having conversations anywhere I go in here in Australia is pretty successful. Not all the time. Sometimes you got to hop around, but for the most part, I've seemed to have good luck since being here, which is good.
That's really good. And then what about, I'm just curious, what about gluten-free beers in Australia? Are there many?
We have a couple of brands, definitely not as much as in the States. So O'Brien's, I think, is our biggest gluten-free beer brewery. They've got heaps and heaps of flavors, and they're awesome, run by Coeliac. And there's Wild beers. They've got a couple of flavors, including like a raspberry pale ale. And then there's some new guys that have come recently. So there's Two Bays, is a gluten-free brewery on the Mornington Peninsula in Melbourne, and they actually have like a whole cafe restaurant in the brewery that's totally gluten-free, like gorgeous setting. So I'm gonna go there in July.
Awesome.
And then Han, the massive company owned by Tui's, they just created 100% gluten-free beer called Han Ultra Crisp, and they're not really, like, it says GF on it, but they're not really pushing it as like your gluten-free beer of choice. They're, I think, trying to keep it as like a preferred light beer option, but also gluten-free. So like really appealing to the masses, and it's actually so good. I'm stoked.
I love it when there's a beer that like non-gluten-free people are like, oh my gosh, this is so good. You know, like that's the mark, I feel like.
It totally is. And the fact that my husband was like, so game for the Han, like he's drinking my beer. I'm like, you can have whatever you want. You need to back out.
Right.
And it's reasonably priced as well. Sorry, I'm not like doing a Han like ad right now, but the fact that he was down to drink it, I was like, this is a good sign for gluten-free beer all over the world.
Yeah.
He's very picky craft beer, so he's picky.
There you go. All right. Well, one day when I come to Australia.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's funny because whenever I was diagnosed with celiac disease when I was in college, and beer was obviously a drink of choice for a lot of people, including myself. But I'd gotten to the point where, like, every time I would drink a beer, I would throw up. And I'm like, what the heck? I've only had 2 beers. Why am I vomiting?
Yeah.
And whenever I was diagnosed with celiac disease and was trying gluten-free beer, I couldn't stomach it. It just made me feel like, you think of those similar sensations. So it took me like a few years out of being diagnosed that I could drink a gluten-free beer and not have like flashbacks to throwing it up. So but now we're good. So, and there's more options than ever, which is
yes, great. That's what I love. I mean, there's, I think maybe 10 or a few more than 10, 100% gluten-free breweries in the US now, which is still small, right? Like it's just the beginning.
So
But they're really good. And I love that that's happening because I think food has come so far, right? Like we have so many options versus even 5 years ago. And I just can't wait until like the alcohol catches up even more so because I think it's coming.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because a couple of years ago, I was sent a product that was an American beer considered to be like it's a gluten-free beer in America. And when it arrived, it said on it like gluten-free, gluten removed beer. And so Australia is, according to my research, the strictest country in the world for their gluten requirements. So for it to be considered gluten-free, it has to be nil detectable. So like less than 5 parts per million, where the rest of the world is 20 parts per million.
Yep.
So I knew that this beer wasn't going to last very long on the shelves here, or that someone would intervene quite quickly to say in Australia, you have to call that low gluten, not gluten-free. And the same applies for oats here in Australia. There's no such thing as a gluten-free oat. So they can only be considered wheat-free, not gluten-free.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So, and I actually have like multiple articles on that if anyone wants to read about why oats are not considered gluten-free in Australia. But essentially, because oats contain avenin, which is one of the proteins found in gluten, and we can't specifically test for avenin. We don't have an instrument for that at this stage. Then Australia says there is a risk. Well, there's two things. One, that it could potentially contain gluten, but two, it's one of those cross-reacting foods where a lot of people who like quinoa can be a cross-reactive food. So your body it responds as if it's having an autoimmune response. So you can do like an oat challenge in Australia, exactly like a gluten challenge, where you have to consume oats every single day for 6 weeks. You have a biopsy at the beginning and then at the end, and they see if you have any damage, and then you're like safe to have uncontaminated oats. But it's very different in Australia than most of the world.
That's very interesting. But I do find a lot of celiacs say they can't tolerate oats in the States. So I think Australia's onto something, quite frankly.
Well, it's actually like 5% of celiacs can't have oats. Don't quote me on that stat, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is, that's a really high number for, if you're thinking like 1% of the world has celiac disease and then 5% of that can't have oats. For what we consider to be a gluten-free food in a lot of countries, and then other people to be having gluten, celiac symptoms too. Australia is just trying to be as careful as possible. And frankly, as a celiac, I'm down for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone
The
else says they
gluten
can't.
consultant says
Yeah.
they can't have oats. So I
Yeah.
know a couple of people that can't. Can't have
So,
any other questions.
um, I have one more question because I feel like
Yeah.
you have a course that people should know about. And I know you just launched another round, I saw. So anyone
Yeah.
listening can have a little more info. I think it'd be awesome if you talk about it.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. So it's called the Gluten-Free Living online course. So it's 8 parts, and there's 4-hour long like modules. You can watch them as you please, but broken down into everything from basic. So it's not just, we talk about celiac disease, and obviously that's going to be the primary in terms of learning about autoimmune conditions and the different responses you might have due to it being an autoimmune condition. But we go into everything to do with gluten-free. So if you have Hashimoto's or another reason why you're gluten-free, that's totally fine. Go into the basics, clearing out your pantry, reading labels, dining out and traveling, emotional and psychological side of things. And honestly, for me, the reason why I have become such an advocate for this course, but also raising awareness for celiac disease, is because I struggled so badly for so many years with what I call food anxiety. It's more social anxiety around food that like when I met my husband 6 years ago, I wasn't eating in front of anyone at that stage because I had developed such a fear around the what ifs on eating out. So I think that's where my real passion for becoming a big advocate for not just normalizing celiac disease, but normalizing the conversation. So it wasn't this huge fear factor all the time. One, fear of getting sick, which is obviously a huge factor in that, but two, just that more like exhausting side of things. So by taking the course, hopefully people, one, answer a whole lot of questions they might have, or learn things that they never even knew or things they should be considering, but also just feel more empowered with their condition. Or like Margaret and her daughter took it. Her daughter, Vass, has celiac disease. and be able to support your family if it's for someone else, or if you're a teacher and you've got kids in your class who have celiac disease, all of that. So that way people know why it's important, why it's so severe, and how we can support each other so it's not so scary and intimidating all of the time.
That's awesome. Oh,
Yeah.
and Margaret says her daughter found it helpful and gave her confidence. I love that. Oh.
Yeah, great. It was so fun having Bass on the course. So yeah, food anxiety I think is a big driver for people to not do a lot of things in life.
Yep.
And my passion with Yum is that people can feel confident in managing celiac disease and they can live a full, free life.
I
mean,
love that.
you're such a great representation of that. Like, you are amazing. Just nonstop everywhere. Like, I feel like you're just like not caution to the wind, obviously, no, you're careful, but you're just like, yeah, let's just do it. It'll work out. Like, you know exactly what to do to stay safe. Obviously, your bag full of snacks, always like prepared.
Well, and that's my thing too, you know, and everyone has to figure out what works for them. But I feel like part of it for me is like, I'm so passionate about it because I feel like I missed out on so much of my life because I was sick and I was depressed and I was miserable.
Totally.
And like, I didn't get to really live my life for, you know, a lot of my like early 20s and things. And so now I'm just like, I don't want this disease to stand in the way of life, and it doesn't have to, you know, like it's a big part of my life, but it doesn't have to define me in a negative way. Like, I view it as a very
100%.
positive thing. And so, you know, I'm super passionate about like, you can still travel, you can still eat out, you can still live your life. And yes, you have to be cautious and careful and ask good questions and all those things, but there is a way, like always.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And I think as well, just in terms of having any sort of condition to be diagnosed with, I just thank God that mine is a condition that we have an answer to. It's the only autoimmune disease that has a known trigger.
Yep.
Like, we know what triggers a response. And even though it can be difficult, we know how to avoid it. And I'm so thankful that at least, even when it's difficult and even when things happen, whether it's at your mother-in-law's house or at a restaurant, things definitely can happen.
Yep.
At least we know why. Like, for me, that's a really empowering side of celiac disease.
I completely agree. Yes. So where can people find you if they want to reach out, if they have more questions?
Yeah. You can find me on anything that says Yum Gluten Free. I'm probably there. So yeah, YUM, Yum Gluten Free. So Instagram, Facebook. We've got really awesome Facebook community called the Yum Gluten Free Village. So you can come and ask questions and just have a bigger sense of, you know, you're not alone, and there's a lot of good conversations that happen in there. And then, of course, on the website, yumglutenfree.com.au, and that's where you can learn more about the course. I am like chronic at getting back to the DMs that are in my inbox. So send me an email as well. That's a better way to get in touch with me sometimes. But I'm getting better. It's my 2019 mission to get on top of my inbox and just be quicker, because it gets a little overwhelming.
That's the thing. It's like when it piles up, then it's like, ooh.
I know. And it's the best part of social media is engaging with your amazing, it's not following, it's community. So I'm getting better at it. But please, get in touch and join the Facebook group so we can chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Olivia. This is so fun. Thanks everyone for watching. I'm just like seriously obsessed with talking to people and hearing stories and sharing knowledge and learning. Like, I learn so much every time.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Carrie. And I cannot wait to stay tuned for all the upcoming lives.
Yay.
So good.
Thanks, Olivia.